Itemizing tanks has always been a difficult question, in both Teamfight Tactics and its spin-off League of Legends. However, in TFT, your tanks only have a maximum of 3 items, unlike League 6, so your item decisions are seemingly much more important in TFT. Luckily for us, TFT's rules are derived from League of Legends, which hasn't changed how it works for more than a decade. So I sat down and did all the research, and now I'll teach you everything I learned about tanks, how they interact with more damage reduction, HP or resistances, and in turn how exactly you should itemize them. Therefore, all the information that I'll present in this video will continue to be true for numerous future TFT sets, as it has been true since its inception. So hi, if you're watching this in set 24, what does the future look like? Although there was a somewhat recent change back in set 10 that nerfed standard tank items by introducing these HP modifiers. But how exactly is it a nerf to these items? Why was negative armor so disgustingly OP that it had to get removed from the game? And did you know that diminishing returns on armor and damage reduction do not exist in League of Legends, nor does it exist in TFT? But before we get into that, this video may be a part of a new series where I explain TFT at a fundamental level. So if you want to see more videos like this or something more specific, let me know in the comments. And of course, if you enjoy the type of content, remember to subscribe. Also, thank you to all my supporters, you guys are legends. Okay, so firstly let's establish the basics, and by doing so let's break the common misconception that stacking armor and damage reduction has diminishing returns. So any unit in League and TFT has Armour and MR, which reduce incoming physical or magical damage respectively. The way the game does this is using the following formula. For now, ignore what happens with a negative armor, we'll get to that later. But with this formula, we can see that if we have 100 armor, then we're reducing incoming damage by 50%. And if we have 400 armor, then we receive a fifth of the damage, or conversely, we reduce incoming damage by 80%. And that is what is leading to the misconception that stacking resistances has diminishing returns. We quadrupled our armor, but our damage reduction only increased by 30%. However, that is not the case. And to see that, let's see how much a unit can tank with varying amounts of armor. Let's say we have a unit with 1000 health and then receiving an instance of 1000 damage. With 0 armor, then we're not reducing the damage at all, and our unit gets one shot. But as we calculated earlier, with 100 armor, we're reducing that damage by 50%. So now we've doubled the number of instances required for the unit to perish. And with 400 armor, the unit now needs 5 instances of damage to perish. A better way to represent this is to see the effective health of your unit, which is calculated as follows. With 0 armor, the unit has 1000 HP both effectively and in reality. With 100 armor, the unit has 2000 effective HP, and with 4000 armor, the unit has 5000 effective health. So with armor or MR, the effective health of the unit is increasing linearly, and there are no diminishing returns. In fact, each point of armor or magic resist increases the effective health by 1%. This misconception is likely derived from the HP bar being unaffected by resistances. You may perceive these HP bars as being the same, when in reality they are not. But with that, we've established that stacking resistances does not lead to diminishing returns, and our unit's effective health increases linearly. That is why Stoneplate is considered one of the strongest tank items in TFT, as stacking it has very little negatives, and we've seen that a lot recently with Wukong. So don't fret if you're stacking armor or MR, your tank will still do their role and you're not losing any value. But is that also true for stacking damage reduction? Well, before we can establish that, we need to prove that armor and MR is treated like another source of damage reduction. So to do that, let's watch this Blitz and Warwick. While Blitz is shielded, he has 40 armor and 10% damage reduction. And Warwick's autos are dealing 102 damage due to his ability, but it's only dealing 65 damage to Blitz while he's shielded. So Blitz is reducing around 36% of Warwick's damage. But if we only consider the armor reduction, Warwick's damage should only be decreasing by 29%. So these sources of damage reduction are stacking, but how? Well, any source of damage reduction is multiplicative with each other, as per League of Legends. So let's follow this logic with Blitz and let's calculate the following. And if we invert this, we get 0.357, which matches what we previously calculated. So think of armor and MR as another source of damage reduction, but it's specific to a particular type of damage. However, in TFT, like League of Legends, damage reduction does not apply to true damage. Usually the only way to block true damage is through shielding, and so true damage is typically the best damage source due to that. So if you're facing a lot of true damage like Camille, then consider playing tanks that shield themselves like Rakan, or you could also make tank items that provide shields like Protector's Vow. However, negative armor and MR was actually way better than this, but I'll get to that in a second, bear with me. Nonetheless, are there diminishing returns if you stack damage reduction? Now let's consider a Vanguard unit who gains 10% damage reduction at the start of combat, but you give them a Steadfast Heart as well, which also grants 15% damage reduction. That would take this unit's start of combat damage reduction to 23.5%. So does that mean you've lost 1.5% damage reduction? Well, again, let's look at the effective HP of our tank. And no, it looks like you've lost nothing at all. 1111 is 85% of 1307, so you've not lost anything. So again, there are no diminishing returns on stacking damage reduction like we previously proved with resistances. Even if you already have another source of damage reduction, your tank will still gain more effective health. So again, don't fret about stacking damage reduction on your tank, it still increases their effective health, which is what you want. Having said that, the items themselves have a small amount of redundancy which was introduced to them back in set 10. When set 10 launched, most tank items were nerfed by reducing their resistances and moving that budget into the raw HP it granted. You may think this is a buff because the unit is getting resistances alongside more HP, but it's actually a nerf for a very specific reason. HP multipliers are additive. And again, we can prove this with Jace with 4 Shapeshifter and double Sterac's Gauge. Jace's base health without any items or traits is 600, and at 3-star with 2 Sterac's Gauge and 4 Shapeshifter, Jace's HP goes to 2696. So this follows the calculation as we expect. But once Jace ults, his HP goes to 3399. We can reuse the same formula, but now the multiplier is 45% rather than 15%, and this calculation again matches what we see. But once both Sterac's procs, his HP goes up to 4571, and if we sum the individual 25% HP modifiers from Sterac's Gauge alongside the Shapeshifter HP, then we get 95%. So again, if we throw in the 95% in the formula, we get 4570.8. So as demonstrated, HP modifiers are additive and not multiplicative, and so stacking them isn't super effective as you would get more effective health through extra resistances or damage reduction. You can represent effective health using the following formula. Let's also compare building Bramble and Warmog pre and post set 10. We can compare the effect of set 9 Bruiser to set 11 Bruiser because they both do exactly the same thing for Bruiser. So let's do this for a unit with 1,800 base HP and 30 armor. What does this mean? Well, as we can see, the reductions in raw armor or MR and flat HP resulted in a slight nerf for these items. But again, even with this small amount of redundancy, your tank's effective HP still increases substantially. And any flat health a unit receives, like through starring up, also increases the effective HP through the amount of armor and MR they already currently have. But now let's answer the biggest question of them all. Is it better to stack health, armor, or damage reduction? Well, to answer that question, we actually need to consider the effect of Sunder and Shred. In TFT, you can't directly reduce their enemy's damage reduction, but you can reduce their armor or MR through items. So let's compare 2 item builds on a Vanguard unit with 1000 base HP and 60 armor. In the first build, this unit has Bramble, which takes them up to 120 armor and in turn 55% reduced physical damage. And in the second build, we're given this unit Steadfast Heart, and in the third build, we're given this unit Warmog. So we get the following. But now let's look what happens when each build's armor decreases by 30%. But wait, one thing that's really interesting here is why is Bramble performing so poorly compared to Steadfast Heart, and even Warmog for that matter? Well, quite frankly, we have too much armor and not nearly enough HP. We can see this from the armor HP equilibrium curve in League. This graph represents when a League champion should have the highest effective health, and we can see that with around 120 armor, we should have at least 2000 HP. So let's revise the example with a more appropriate base HP following the curve. Specifically, let's say we've 2-starred a unit and their base HP goes to 1800. Now what you can see from this is that armor reduction tilts the optimal health armor ratio slightly in the favor of raw HP. And while Steadfast Heart clears Bramble prior to the armor reduction, post reduction they're somewhat similar. And this is likely due to the diversity of stats that Steadfast grants: armor, flat HP, and damage reduction. But in regards to Bramble, this may be somewhat obvious to say, but the more armor you have pre-reduction, the more armor you will have post-reduction. So it does make sense for it to take the lead on Steadfast Heart. However, armor reduction does make stacking resistances less effective than building HP. That is why Warmog still performs well on Shapeshifters despite the additive HP modifiers. It's just a ton of raw HP to get through. Having said that, unlike HP, increasing armor or damage reduction also makes any source of healing or shielding more effective because enemy units will need to do more damage to remove that restored HP. So stacking HP is not ideal compared to damage reduction or armor if you have a source of shielding or healing. Furthermore, you don't necessarily need to build HP on your unit as you can just re-roll them to star them up and increase their base HP by a factor of 1.8. Nevertheless, if you stack damage reduction without any resistances, Sunder will also reduce the effect of that damage reduction as the unit has less armor and will take more physical damage. Regardless of unit, having low resistances reduces the effect of damage reduction. In fact, that is part of the reason why negative armor and MR was removed from TFT. Simply put, if a unit has negative armor or a Mar, they take drastically more damage. Let's take the previous example of a unit with 10% damage reduction from Vanguard and 15% from Steadfast Heart, and so we get 23.5% damage reduction overall. However, let's also say that we have negative 45 armor. At that point, all of the damage reduction is completely ignored, as we can see here. In fact, in this specific example, if we start going beyond negative 45 armor, then the physical damage output actually becomes stronger and better than true damage, as you're getting an additional damage amplifier. And that's even factoring in that true damage ignores all damage reduction. With negative 45 armor, the unit has effectively lost 24% of the maximum HP. That is ridiculous. So as we can see, negative armor or a Mar was extremely OP. Units would lose their resistances, at some point lose the effect of any damage reduction, have an increased damage multiplier from those sources, as well as losing effective health. Honestly, it's pretty clear that removing negative armor and a Mar was a good thing, because it was just better than true damage, as well as making tanks completely irrelevant. But at this point, let's summarize what we've learned. Stacking armor, damage reduction, or HP does not have any diminishing returns, as they all multiplicatively increase the effective health of any tank. And that's the goal for any tank. You maximize their effective health to buy as much time as possible for your carries. Consequently, tank items have never really needed to be hyper optimized in TFT. Focusing on the optimal carry items is vastly more important than tank items. The difference between sub and optimal carry items is vastly larger than the difference between sub and optimal tank items. Tank items are universal and they all increase the effective health on whoever they're placed on, whereas that is not the case for carries. It's not like you can give your AD carry Rabadon and expect to win every round, right? We can also interpret this as an opportunity cost. You are losing value by focusing far too much on your tank items and not your carry items. And by doing so, your border is drastically weaker. Tanks just exist to soak up damage, but of course, if there is no opportunity cost, then you can freely apply what I've taught you with no concerns. But honestly, I think that should cover everything. The only thing that I could not understand for the life of me is what is happening with Taric and Rumble when they ult. Like, they gain AP and they're gaining more damage reduction, but the damage reduction they're gaining does not add up at all. Like, what is going on here? Nonetheless, I'd like to thank my supporters and my Twitch subscribers because, again, without them, I wouldn't be able to make content like this. So thank you guys so much for helping me exist. I truly and honestly appreciate it. Thank you. But at this point, let me pass over the questions to you guys. An interesting question I thought about actually is, when was the last time you saw an infinite tank in TFT? Of course, I'd like to ask if you found this video helpful at all, and if you did, is there anything else you'd like to see? Let me know in the comments, and of course, remember to subscribe whilst you're at it. Anyway, check out these other videos if you want to see more from me, and as always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.